You know what? I think, for me, I think a great question is to ask yourself or ask someone, what advice would you give the 21-year old version of yourself? And for me, it would be able to speak, be bilingual. When I say that, I grew up in Oklahoma. I had 65 first cousins. My dad, he's a very rich culture in Spanish, but I grew up in an environment where it was just very uh, prejudiced, and we weren't allowed to speak it. So, I think when I was in going into college at Oklahoma, the pronunciation was different where I live. It's more like an Anglo neighborhood, and it was more pronounced, more kind of an Anglo type of pronunciation. And so when I go to my grandfather's house, my other uncle, it was pronounced Casillas. And so, I think that at that point, I realized that that was the reason why my family, my dad, didn't speak the proper pronunciation because of just the prejudice. So when I went to college, I made it a point to make sure that I reached out and really understood my culture, being Hispanic. And obviously, when it came to Dallas, man, there was so much connection because, Texas, there's so many Hispanics that live here, and just kind of identified with me as a player. And I just kind of embraced that. I think that that's something that I would always, I kind of drew from support and really embracing that and being proud of it. Because at times it was kind of embarrassing because I start speaking, Spanish people like, "Hey, Tony Casillas," and I'd say, I'd have a conversation, and they would kind of lose me because I wasn't fluent. So I think that that really kind of drew I would say my strength towards my culture, and really just with kids, and really just, my message with them is like, hey, embrace where you're from, embrace your culture, and really kind of use it as a vehicle to motivate yourself, and really kind of, steer your way throughout, your culture, to be able to look up to you. And I think that that's kind of the biggest thing I ever learned about being, Latino, and really just embracing that. It's just to tell kids, look, it's a vehicle for you. It's not something you got to be proud of it. So I think that's something I really was inspired by.
Well, I grew up in Miami in a large Cuban community, um, with Puerto Ricans, with Dominican Republican kids. And if you look at Major League Baseball today, there's so many Cuban players. When I played, there weren't very many. And even before my time, there weren't very many. So I think that I did play a role somewhat in inspiring that next generation of Cuban players. A lot of these guys actually grew up in Cuba watching me play when I was playing. But if you look at the makeup of the Major League Baseball players today, there's a lot of Cuban players, there's a lot of Puerto Rican players, Dominican, you know, that Latin American, influence. And I think, like you said, it's just the players that played in the '90s, Mariano, myself, A-Rod, Pudge. Those kids looked up to us, and they wanted to be us. They wanted to follow in our footsteps. And I think that we made a great impact in our communities, and we actually have inspired that next generation. And they're doing some great things. There's some great Cuban baseball players that are doing some great things in Major League Baseball today.
Yeah, I probably would just say proud. I mean, that's the biggest word I can think of. Obviously, Latinos are super proud, and I just think of a lot of pride with my last name, my heritage. Growing up, I'm half Mexican, half white, and but growing up, playing soccer all the time, I spent all my weekends in the Mexican leagues, like back in my hometown in Texas, in East Texas, and so I was always around the Mexican culture. My dad's from Mexico, so I just have a lot of pride wearing that last name. I had the fortune to also play in Mexico, so being here in the States, I wore that last name with a lot of pride, just knowing that there were a lot of, young Hispanics trying to get to the next level, but not just in sports. I made it a point for myself after I retired from soccer to go back and finish my college degree. All those things were important because I knew there was people looking up to me. And we're on a huge platform that, it's again, a lot of kids looking up to us. And so I've always tried to just I guess showcase myself the best of that I could, and be a great example to those young kids. But on the opposite side, I would say this: I played in Mexico, and in Mexico, I was considered an American. I was considered a gringo in Mexico. So being half white, I was considered a gringo. But I will say that I also had the fortune of being able to play for the Mexican or USA national team growing up, just because I had the double nationality. And so it just was always a pride thing for me, and always trying to be a huge example to the youngsters coming up. Again, my dad being from Mexico, he was the first from his family to come over. And he ended up becoming a high school soccer coach. He ended up being a college soccer coach. So, and that's without any sort of degree. I mean, he made it coming from Mexico. And so I think it gives a lot of hope to a lot of Hispanics.
Daniel, Tony, and Rafael specifically. Daniel, you had the chance to play, like you mentioned, for both the U.S. national team or as well as Mexico's. You experienced firsthand having that complex I refer to kind of the Selena movie, where the dad says being Mexican American is hard, and seeing Jesus Ferreira and Brandon Vasquez coming and making that decision, do you believe that will be an additional motivator? Because, of course, what I appreciate about this country is our diversity. We are very much a mix, a true representation of the globe in one particular place, but sometimes it's often, it can be misinterpreted or undermined depending on where you stand or whose stance it is. But again, having folks like Reggie in the past and yourself and countless others, do you believe that there will be more diversity within the U.S. men's national teams, and particularly of Latino descent, in the future?
Yeah, so I think that's what makes America the best country in the world. It's all the diversity here, and you've noticed on the national team all the change over the past couple of years of, again, the names that you mentioned: Ferreira, Vasquez, Zendejas from Mexico as well. Those guys have decided to come here and play for the United States, and I think that will happen more and more moving forward. Because they see the opportunity here, they see the vision here in the U.S., and so they know the great vision and where this national team is going. And that's probably one of the reasons why 2026 will probably be the greatest opportunity for this national team here in the United States. So I think we'll see that more and more.